Today we're diving into the unsettling world of the Poughkeepsie Tapes, this 2007 pseudo-documentary horror film directed by John Erick Dowdle tells the harrowing story of a serial killer in Poughkeepsie, New York. Through interviews and the killer's own snuff films, we witness a grim portrait of terror. Premiering first at the Tribeca Film Festival, the film faced a troubling release, disappearing from schedules before finally being remastered and released in 2017. Join us as we unravel the chilling details and the complex journey of this haunting film. Get ready to explore the darkness behind the Poughkeepsie Tapes, here today on Podio Commentary. Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary, and we're diving in to this movie, this weird mockumentary that came out a long time ago called the Poughkeepsie Tapes. It's very much a cult film. It's very much a cult favorite movie, I believe. And it's one I just rewatched the other day. I literally got off of a 10.5-hour shift at work, came home and was like, I just want to unwind and watch a movie. So I'm thumbing through what's on Tubi, and I come across the Poughkeepsie Tapes, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll give this a watch again. I saw it a long time ago, and I think I saw it in 2014 when the movie was released very briefly before being pulled again from MGM. Now, there is a weird idea about what this movie is, right? There's a kind of an urban legend surrounding the Poughkeepsie Tapes. The trailer for this first premiered, I want to say, in late 2007. I forget which horror movie I was watching in the theater when I first saw the trailer for this, but it would have been in the fall of 2007. Was it Alien versus Predator, maybe? Requiem, the sequel, came out around that time. But I forget which movie it was. But I remember seeing the trailer for this movie and seeing that it was coming out in early 2008. Now, what you got to remember is that Cloverfield was also coming out right around that same time. In fact, Cloverfield came out January 18th, 2008. This movie was originally slated for theatrical release in February 8th of 2008. So just like 2.5-3 weeks later, another found footage movie was going to hit theaters. That might have been one of the reasons why MGM ultimately decided, nah, we're not going to do this. We're not going to make this movie. We're not going to release it to the public when they said that they were going to. The word on the street became, oh, well, this movie is too violent. It's too gory. It's too over the top. It's too disgusting. We don't want that out there. It's too horrible for the audience to see. That might have made it all the more popular. Because years went by, and I mean this, literal, like 6 years went by until DirecTV decided that they wanted to release this movie. And then it only lasted for a few weeks. And then MGM pulled the plug again, holding it until 2017 when it was officially released on Blu-ray and DVD. Now, I saw this movie in 2014. And I'll admit, I saw the movie when it came out because somebody had told me it had leaked online, and one of my friends gave me a copy. I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of movies get shared around privately via piracy or torrenting or whatever. And I have a real weird theory about how a lot of these pirate websites are actually run by studios as forms of market research, trying to turn would-be pirates into customers. It's a long game hold. I'll have to discuss it at a further point in time. But this is one that I saw back then. And I remember sitting down and watching it on my computer and just feeling this sense of unease, feeling this very dreaded sense of like, could this be real? Now, you guys got to remember, Blair Witch Project is one of my all-time favorite movies. I got absolutely sucked into the reality of that world leading up to it. I was only 17, okay? So don't judge me. A lot of people did. But if a movie like this, if a mockumentary like this, or a found footage film is able to establish the world, establish the rules, and establish its legitimacy, if you will, I looked at as being something of value, and I can find myself getting lost in the story, even though, here it is 2024. I haven't seen, I'm watching the movie 10 years later. I can see through the cracks. I can see through the veneer. I can see through them trying to polish a turd at a little bit every once in a while. And I'm not saying the movie's bad. I'm just using that as a colloquialism, right? As a phrase, if you will. But this movie is definitely not as wild as it was set out to be, or I should say, as it was promised to be. And maybe therein lies the issue. Maybe therein lies the overall aspect of it, which is where they had said, you know, this movie got banned because of what? Was it too violent, too gory, too gross? If you watch the movie, there's really not that much violence. If you watch the film, it relies a lot on psychological torture, a lot of screaming, a lot of very creepy point of view footage that could potentially lead to something that is violent, or in many cases does lead to something that is violent, but it's not without its flaws. It's not without its faults, and it's not without its tropes that it's needing to use in order to kind of move the story along. Because here you've got this premise of the FBI catching on to a serial killer in Poughkeepsie, New York. They raid the house. They find 2,500 tapes. They find all of this evidence, all of these snuff films that he has recorded, everything he has recorded, left behind, as well as the victim who he kidnapped, Cheryl Dempsey. And she is completely tore up, traumatized, tortured. Everything you can think of has happened to this woman. Completely Stockholm Syndrome, completely brain broken. And from there, it goes to a bunch of talking heads that are trying to psychoanalyze, that are trying to pinpoint why this guy did what he did, how he did what he did, how he was so efficient at doing what he was doing, and why they were never able to capture him. And there was this weird bit of satire in the movie, right? Maybe it's a little bit too on the nose. Maybe it's a little bit of making fun of true crime documentaries, even though this was made in 2007, where it's almost like the appeal was there for people who love the gore, right? Like the FBI is like, we don't know how he did it. He is so brutal. He is so crazy. You know, we found all of these bodies in his backyard. We found all of these dismemberments, and then they intersplice it, you know, a little bit here and there with like some of the ways he was able to dismember a body, albeit through very grainy, very warbly and warped VHS footage. And it is almost in many ways. There's like one female agent in the movie that every time they talk to her, she kind of has this like, maybe it was her performance, maybe it's what they told her to do, but she was almost acting like, well done. There's a great Eddie Izzard bit from the comedy special in 2000 called Dressed to Kill, where he talks about like mass murdering fuckheads. And he's like, at some point in time, it's almost like saying, we just lose count of how many people are killed. We just lose count. And it's almost like saying, well done. You know, your calendar must be very full. Wake up in the morning, breakfast, death, lunch. It's a whole bit about that. But when you think about this from that lens, it kind of seems to make a fair amount of sense. Here is a guy who has been documenting his crimes for years, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of tapes. For people to look through to kind of figure it all out. And yet still never found himself getting caught. But you got to remember that this was set during the 1990s. Okay. The internet wasn't as big as it was. Many people out there thought that it was a fad. There was a lot of other issues going on with it at the time. And serial killers, you know, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s were able to get away with a lot more because a lot of these jurisdictions didn't communicate with one another. In fact, even now, a lot of these jurisdictions, these small little places, whether they're parishes or whatever, they don't communicate with other agencies outside of their bubble. So if there is an active serial killer that's operating in any given area, of which I believe there's between 25 and 50 active at any given time in the United States, one of the things we're really proficient at here in this country is breeding prolific serial killers. We're quite good at that, sadly. But in this movie, they there's a lot that they don't know about yet because they never knew that it was a killer. There's this part in the film where they literally talk about like how there are competing and conflicting psychological profiles made up of this killer, of what is effectively known as the Water Street Butcher. And it's all contradictory. He had a broken home. He's ill-educated. He had a complete home. He's quite educated. He's this, he's that, he's everything in between. And they can't lock it down because they weren't looking for that pattern. The only reason that they were able to figure out who this guy was, what he was doing and what he was up to, was because he gave them the information. He gave them the information. And that is one of the, I guess you could argue, like the plotting and the planning that goes into this particular killer, what he did, feels so over the top and feels so absolutely unbelievable that it kind of falls into the realm of ridiculous. And let me explain. So he's killing all of these people, right? While he's got a girl, 19-year-old Cheryl Dempsey, locked up in the basement. He beats her, he tortures her, he makes her, call herself slave. He's the master. He makes her admit that she is happy that he killed her parents, even though he never killed her parents. She doesn't know any of that. He destroys her psychologically. He gets her to be complicit in his crimes. He gets her to commit murders for him. And it's all done for the perspective of just establishing that dominance. And she is his plaything. And she thinks he loves her, even though he actually, no, I'm not going to lie. Given the beginning of the movie, when we see her body exhumed from the ground, being drugged out by a car, and then him taking her body with him, yeah, I would argue to some extent that's a really twisted sense of love. This movie pulls a bit from like different killers. Like obviously there's a whole bit in the film about him going back to the different dump sites and then having his way sexually with the victims in order to relive the thrill. That's very much, if I recall, like a Ted Bundy thing. So they pull from different serial killers, but they don't go as far as being like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ed Gein, where there's like body dismemberment. I mean, no, there is body mutilation, but it's never done in a way. We don't really, well, okay, hold on. I am completely getting ahead of myself here. When we talk about the unbelievable, that's really what I wanted to focus on. Like, it just felt, part of it was kind of felt unbelievable. They tried to base it in a sense of reality, but it ultimately turned out to be unbelievable. And just kind of how it all played out. And then like there's the Anderson family, where they pick him up, Ed being the hitchhiker, being the killer, and he hits the guy in the head and then goes and chloroforms the woman. And as he's chloroforming her, he's got the camera out in front of him, like he's recording her face as she's being succumbed with, chloroform. By the way, chloroform, it takes a lot of chloroform to knock somebody out. Like that's the reality of it. But in the movie, it's still a striking scene. This woman is clearly upset. She is clearly being, drugged with a chemical. He's got a camera in her face. She put on a good performance. Actually, I do want to quickly point out, Cheryl Dempsey, Stacy Shabatsky, the woman who played the character, is actually also married to the director, John Erick Dowdle. So he's cast his wife, Stacy Shabatsky. I make sure I said that correctly. He cast his wife as the torture victim. Now, I don't know if they got married before or after this happened, but they are apparently still together, and good for him. So that's kind of funny to me. But again, the idea here, I just want to say, she puts on a hell of a performance. She puts on a great performance. That's fantastic. But you get into the unbelievable when going back to the Anderson family, where the woman's like knocked out, and he goes and he wakes her up, and he says, "Hey, I got a surprise for you." And he had dismembered the husband, took off his head, and then sewed it into her abdomen like a baby for her to wake up and witness that she now has a head of her husband in her stomach. And then like, but they don't really dwell on it, I should say. Like it's in the movie, you can see it, but they don't really dwell on it. There is gore, but it's so fastly cut together that you really can't focus a great deal on it. It's mostly, I believe, done through a lot of audio cues. There's a lot of sound design that went into it. I think the sound design does more to manipulate the mind when we are seeing this kind of stuff play out. And that is where you get a lot of the visceral nature of the movie. That's where you get a lot of that ideas is coming from what you see in regards to really what you're hearing, if that even makes any bit of sense. Because otherwise it's a lot of just talking heads or the removal of them and then inserting them via cesarean, into a victim. That's pretty, that was kind of unbelievable, right? It was kind of unbelievable. But the idea here is that they're trying to show his evolution as a killer, that he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he is. He is just now experimenting and just doing all of these things, which, I mean, largely in the realm of serial killers out there, it does make a lot of sense. He is at this point going, yes, I am unsure of who I am, but I want to be the very best, the best there ever was. And instead of catching Pokemon, he's killing, hookers. But he's using Cheryl Dempsey as a partner in crime in all of this. However, what they end up doing is they end up getting what they believe is a fingerprint. And that leads them to a cop, right? That leads them to a cop named James Foley. And now Foley has like a history of purchasing sex, and he is mentioned in eyewitness statements, and he's a cop and everything else. He's got no matching alibi, and they found his sperm samples. They think that they got the Water Street Butcher. This is where it gets kind of weird, is they think that they've caught him, and they sentence him to death in 1996, but he doesn't actually get killed until September 9th, 2001. And then a couple days later, they end up exonerating him because the killer ends up reaching out to Foley's old partner saying, oh, hey, you missed one. But the thing is 9/11 happens, and then no one talks about the exoneration because everyone is talking about 9/11. And so he gets exonerated, but no one talks about it. And that to me is a massive criticism and indictment of the US media, just media at large. We see this now quite a bit, where you have a story that will make its way around the internet, if you will, that could be largely false, based upon bad information or outright malicious in its nature. And then when the correction is issued, no one knows about it because it's moved on from the cycle. The outrage has already happened, and only a few people see it, and they're not going to go out there and advocate for more people to know about it, right? Because this is not how we operate. And so I thought that was a really interesting part of the entire thing. And then he starts killing again. So Ed, the Water Street Butcher, starts killing again, but they were able to reverse engineer the IP address that went to the MapQuest website in order to then lead it back to the empty house where the killer was. And inside they find the tapes, and inside they find Cheryl. And I thought that was interesting because, a lot of killers, you watch like CSI, you watch a lot of these shows and these movies, and they're really smart and they're able to get around everything. And a lot of people will think, but they always get caught. That's what I want to say. They always get caught. But a lot of criminals, real life criminals, think that what they see in Law and Order, what they see in, CSI, what they see in those true crime shows, is that they see the whole investigation and they go, oh, I now know how to get around everything because I've watched it all play out on movies and television. And the thing is, homicide detectives want people to think that way. They want the killers to think that way, so then they can use that against them in the investigation. And this was told to me by an actual homicide detective, retired, for the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office back in 2012 when I attended a 2-day homicide writers course that he was teaching to help writers in Hollywood better understand police procedure in regards to the homicide detectives. So that's always stuck with me. So as I'm watching this, with that in my mind, it does make a lot of sense. And so the movie, has this interesting thing of we don't know where he is. he stopped killing in this area. We think he's moved on. But the filmmakers go talk to Cheryl Dempsey. And again, Stacey Schabotsky, she did not get anywhere near the recognition for her performance. Her final performance in the movie, when she is when she's beaten and battered, tortured, and she is fighting back tears, and she's like, what do you want me to say? I don't know. And she's like losing her mind because like they're asking her questions. She doesn't know how to respond. She's like, he loves me, but no one will let me say that. Right? Obviously indicating the Stockholm syndrome, all of those things. She ends up like rubbing her, she had been brutalized to the point of where her hand had to be amputated. But they didn't say that when they were talking about what happened to her. The doctor's like, there are so many things that have happened that are just too terrible to mention, but they brought up severe sexual torture, but they didn't, whatever. But she lost her hand, and just her emaciated look and everything else, complete broken psychology performance is amazing. Is really, really, really amazing. And she did a fantastic job. And I thought you would think that this movie would have done more. It would have been able to elevate her profile. It just didn't. One of the interesting things that they tried to do with this is they added in a little bit with the talking head. One of the detectives, I think from the FBI at the end of the movie. And he is very much talking about how like, well, if this little movie of yours ends up going to theaters, we'll be watching because he won't be unable to not come and see it. And the idea behind that is like the killer could be anyone in the theater. It could even be the person sitting next to you, which in 2008, audiences, I don't think were as savvy to this kind of stuff as they are now. And even now, they probably would still fall for it. But if you have a packed theater, if you've got a packed house, a couple hundred people all invested in this documentary, watching this guy dismember this woman psychologically, as well as other people physically. And then at the very end, it's almost like that whole, they could be sitting next to you, which almost feels like an old Hollywood playbook or an old play from an old playbook that they would have done. Imagine being in that theater, and even though you know it's not real, you just kind of start looking around, right? Nervously, laughing, especially at the beginning of the movie when they say that there's like 25 to 50 active serial killers. And I do think that's a real number, by the way. I've heard it mentioned before. That's why I think it's real. It would have absolutely messed with your head. It would have absolutely made you feel that you are sitting amongst someone who could have killed someone. And the reality of it is there's a high probability at some point in time you have. That's a brilliant aspect of the storytelling. And then MGM had to come in and fuck it all up by not releasing the damn thing back in February, right before Valentine's Day. This would have been a Valentine's Day date movie. Like, hey, babe, what do you want to do tonight? You want to go see a movie? Yeah, okay. What do you want to watch? Oh, there's this really cool, documentary about a serial killer called the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Let's go check it out. You know what I mean? Like, you want to see a scary movie on Valentine's Day so I can get a handy in the parking lot? Like, things like that. It would have brought people in. However, let me also point out one thing. Going back to that idea. I mentioned earlier that it could have been Cloverfield. That would have hurt it. I don't quite know about that because George A. Romero's Diary of the Dead opened on Valentine's Day in 2008 as well. I know because after my Valentine's Day date that I had that night, she had to go to work in the morning. She did not want to come with me to watch the midnight show of Diary of the Dead. I went to go see it myself. And that was also a point of view found footage coming just a few weeks after Cloverfield. So it's entirely possible that MGM just felt that it was an entirely oversaturated market. I don't know why they didn't wait until Halloween. I don't know why Halloween 2008 would have been great. I don't recall there being a point of view found footage horror film that year. However, 2009 was Paranormal Activity. And I think Paranormal Activity changed the game for point of view found footage. It just did. It just absolutely changed the game. And so it's entirely possible that MGM just didn't know what to do with it. And so they just let it sit until DirecTV picked it up, put it out there. Copies made their way around the internet for anyone who was watching this kind of stuff and wanted to see it. then they pulled it again, and then they held it for 3 more years. That's kind of crazy to me, right? It's kind of crazy to me that they did that. It's wild, all things considered. But it wasn't like John Erick Dowdle didn't get work afterward. Okay. The Poughkeepsie Tapes were done in 2007, scheduled to come out in 2008. In that time, he had secured another gig. He actually directed the oh no, that's probably why the Poughkeepsie Tapes didn't come out in 2008, is the fact that he directed the point of view found footage remake of Rec, the excellent Spanish found footage film. That movie scared the hell out of me. And they directed the remake of that. And that came out on October 10th, 2008. So he was supposed to have 2 movies come out that year. MGM, for some reason, pulled it. This one was done by Sony. So this wasn't an MGM thing. But then he went on to do the movie Devil in 2010, which was produced by M. Night Shyamalan. And that was one that, again, a lot of people thought that it was an M. Night Shyamalan movie because they saw from producer M. Night Shyamalan. But apparently Devil's really good. It's a very simple movie. It's not a mockumentary. It's not a found footage. It's a very simple premise. I remember being at the movie theater in LA when we got it. I didn't watch it, but people told me that it was quite good. And then after directing that one, 4 years later, was the As Above, So Below, which was the point of view found footage movie in the Paris catacombs. That, as far as I remember, didn't do very well. However, it was produced through Legendary. And so, I mean, that's a step up, right? It had a budget of between 5 and 10 million. It grossed 49.1 million. But it didn't do very well. It has like 28% Rotten Tomatoes. And that's As Above, So Below. And then after that, the last movie he did, the last thing he's really been a part of, is that No Escape film from 2015. That one with Owen Wilson, Lake Bell, and even Pierce Brosnan. It's about an expat engineer trapped with his family in an unnamed country in Southeast Asia during a violent uprising. And I remember this coming out. I've heard good things about it, even though it did get banned in Cambodia. But still, it ended up, not doing great. It did better than As Above, So Below, right? However, it still, it didn't really make a lot of money. Not as much as they needed, I should say. Even though it had a budget of $5 million. Well, no, it's not true. It had a budget of $5 million, according to Wikipedia, and it grossed about $55 million. So that's 11 times its production budget. That is absolutely a moneymaker for the Weinstein Company who put it out. And it's funny because it all kind of goes back to the Poughkeepsie Tapes, right? It all kind of goes back to that, where that ended up getting him in the door because it premiered at Tribeca Film Festival in May 2007. And that would have opened the door to being brought in to do Quarantine. But then they either they were banking on that as being a thing. I don't know. I just feel like looking at where things were at the time, it shows us why MGM didn't release it. It's just, maybe it was too graphic, even though it really wasn't. Maybe they felt that it would have been too much. Maybe they felt that it would have been far too disgusting, far too riveting. Think about like when The Joker came out in 2019, there was all that push for the movie to, like, it was going to create a new killer. What if they felt that this movie was going to create a new serial killer because of how realistic it felt, how graphic it felt? Would it be a trigger, or would it be something opening the door for other people? I don't quite know. But to wrap everything up, the movie does have its place in cult cinema. It does have its place in the echelons, in the annals, in the halls of horror. And it does kind of stand on its own in a way that hasn't really been replicated in any way that I felt is worthwhile. It's a movie that you hear about, but I guess you could say the mystery, the allure, the controversy might actually be more of like a marketing tactic than anything else. I don't know. If you haven't seen the movie, I know I've spoiled the hell out of it. It is worth giving a watch. You can find it right now on Tubi. Check it out. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please follow me on Twitter at mjarbo. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. We're going to be back with more episodes this week. Again, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you. Have yourself a great day. Go watch a scary movie. Recommend me a movie if you want me to see something. Have a great one, everybody. Thank you again, and peace the hell out.